When your sports teams win as much as Boston's have lately, you don't tend to see many big changes in the way they operate. After all, why mess with success? Case in point, Bill Belichick, who spent 2 decades running the Patriots, or Cam Neely, who's been in charge of the Bruins for more than 10 years. Theo Epstein's charmed run with the Red Sox lasted a decade too. And then there's Celtics president Danny Ainge, who was approaching 2 decades with the team until the sudden announcement last week that he was leaving, with former head coach Brad Stevens taking over and a yet-to-be-determined hire replacing him. Ainge won 2 championships as a player and 1 as an executive in 2008 when he was the NBA's Executive of the Year. But he leaves the team after a disappointing season that ended in a first-round playoff exit and some unpleasant controversy, with former Celtic Kyrie Irving preemptively accusing Boston fans of racism and one fan embarrassing himself and the city by throwing a water bottle at Irving's head. So what will it take for a team that still sees itself as one of the league's marquee franchises to contend again? And why are so many fans stepping over the line in this NBA postseason in Boston and elsewhere? Joining me to talk it through are Gary Washburn, the Boston Globe's national basketball writer, and my colleague Esteban Bustillos, who covers the Celtics and all things sports for GBH News. Thank you both for being here. Gary, let me start with you. I was going to call Ainge's exit unexpected when I wrote up today's show, but then it occurred to me it might not have been. I'm on the outside, you are on the inside. Did people see this coming?
I don't think people saw it coming in terms of him retiring right after the season. I did think that he was getting a little tired, and I think he was kind of seeing the end. I don't know whether he thought to himself, I'll go another couple of years. And then once this year occurred, and as taxing as it was, he was like, okay, I'm done. Or whether he had been thinking about this year. Remember, he had a heart attack 2 years ago, and that was his second heart attack. So he's 62 years old. He's got kids and grandkids. He's got a son who ran for state office in Utah. He's got many, other children. Huge family. I just think he wanted to hit the golf course and maybe take a break. I think it's a lot of pressure, this job now, with social media, every fan thinking they're an NBA expert, an insider. It is everyone's second guessing you. Everyone's telling you what you should do, thinking they can do your job better than you can. And I think maybe the pressure was just a little too much for Danny at age 62. Maybe he kind of saw, hey, I need to get out before I get, anything else happens. And while I'm still healthy and I can play golf and enjoy my family.
I'm glad you brought up the personal stuff, because I think a lot of fans, myself included, tend to forget that not just the athletes, but the people who run the teams are in fact humans who think about the kind of thing you mentioned. Briefly, as you look back on the Ainge era, what are a couple of the things he did really well, and what are a couple of the areas where he may have struggled in?
Well, the first thing he did well was hire Doc Rivers. He brought Doc back to, had been fired with the Orlando Magic. He took a chance on him and ended up working out greatly. And then secondly, he put together a championship team. He was kind of the innovator of the big three, which is basically 3 stars on one team, which is a formula that NBA teams still go by now. If you look at the Brooklyn Nets and they just beat up the Celtics, they have 3 stars, Irving, Harden, and Kevin Durant, just like back in the day it was Garnett, Allen, and Paul Pierce. He put that together. They won a championship and finished Game 7 of another, losing in 7 games to the Lakers in 2010. So he built the Celtics back up to prosperity and greatness after some really difficult times following. Obviously, if you go way back to the death of Lynn Bias, the death of Reggie Lewis, missing out on Tim Duncan in the draft lottery, that would have been changed the whole franchise. So he took the franchise from some very dark times, the Pitino era, some dark times, back to prosperity. But in the last several years, he accumulated this treasure chest of draft picks that was supposed to acquire a major superstar to become the next great all-time Celtic. That didn't ever worked. He kind of maybe wasted, some people might say, all those draft picks. And they ended up, getting Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown through those picks. So you can't say it was a total failure. But a lot of those picks turned out to be players who were, didn't help them.
Yeah.
And so they weren't able to ever reach that championship level as they did in 2008 and 2010.
I was looking at some of the names of players they did pick who didn't pan out, and I'd forgotten how many there were. Esteban, let me turn to you. I have thought in the past few years of the Celtics, at the start of every season, they are a contender to win the East and go to the finals. That's how I've thought of it anyway, as a casual fan. But all of a sudden this year, they barely made the playoffs. To your eye, what went wrong? What are the big things that went wrong?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to talk about when you're talking about the season, this probably goes for everyone for the past 2 seasons, is COVID. The Celtics arguably had the highest impact from COVID this season, where Jason Tatum was out for a long time with the disease, and he later admitted he had to start using an inhaler before games, which is a crazy thing for somebody as young as him. Yeah, and he's going out there and playing NBA games. And even after the Celtics lost their Game 5 against the Brooklyn Nets, Brad Stevens himself said, listen, we never really had this team together the way that we fully wanted to over the course of a whole year. So I think when every conversation about this year with the Celtics has to start there. You get into the basketball. Yeah, the basketball wasn't great at times, but I think looking at that everything they dealt with COVID makes everything else just that much more difficult.
Yeah.
And then they had to play the Nets in the first round.
There's that.
Nobody wants to go up against Kyrie and Katie and James Harden.
Injuries to Jaylen Brown, right? Injuries or injury issues with Kemba Walker, who was supposed to replace Kyrie Irving as the go-to guy. I could keep going on about this for a while, but I want to shift gears a little bit and do some sport and society talk with you guys. There has been so much abuse directed at players over the course of this postseason. We talked about Kyrie Irving having the water bottle thrown at him, Trae Young spat on playing against the Knicks in New York, Russell Westbrook, popcorn thrown on him in Philadelphia. Utah fans making racist comments to Ja Morant's family. We actually have a little video of, I believe, Ja Morant's father talking about that experience. Let's take a look.
Then it was a fan like 3 rows behind me with his little daughter, and he was like, I'll put a nickel in your back, boy, and watch you dance. And I turned around like, yo, I ain't nobody, boy. And then another one told my wife to shut the F up or sit down, something like that. And he got escorted out. I don't get it because you're there to root for your team.
What do you two think is going on here with this really, really ugly stuff perpetrated almost exclusively, I think exclusively by white fans against black players? Gary, what's your take?
Well, I think that there's a level of jealousy that they're successful, especially on your opposing team. I think it goes back to if they're for your guys, they're good black people, they're good Latinos, they're good because they play for your team. So the Red Sox fans love David Ortiz, but if they're like the Bruins a few years ago, PK Subban from Montreal scores a goal, then he's the enemy and he gets racial remarks yelled at him, or Adam Jones with the Orioles. So I think it's a level of it's the term fanatic, considering them in your enemy and then saying whatever you want to get under their skin. And also, too, there's little punishment for this. I mean, the kid he's a man who threw the bottle at Kyrie is out of jail. He's told to stay away from TD Garden where there's no games anymore. Okay, you can't go see Bruno Mars at TD Garden. Where's the punishment here?
And I got to say,
he gets publicity. He gets on TV.
When I saw him, the shots, I think Shots from the Globe, your photographer got some great images of him being led away. And he was, I think, taking selfies. He looked pumped. It was his moment in the spotlight.
Yes.
Esteban, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. What do you think is driving this ugliness?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of what Gary just said. And Kyrie alluded to it after the game where the water bottle got thrown at him, that athletes are seen as, specifically black athletes, oftentimes are seen as nothing more than just that. Their personhood is taken for granted. I talked to last week I talked to Joseph Cooper, who's a professor at UMass Boston, who studies race and gender in sport. And he said the same thing, that historically Black athletes have always been seen as almost just like a commodity. They're not really a person. They're not really anything besides what they produce on the court for many people. And I think, you can't, this isn't an excuse by any means, but the fact that fans have been pent up inside for so long, it does make me wonder if with the sort of return to playoff basketball, if they almost forgot how to act. But at the same time, I don't think if you were going to do that, then you were going to do that now as well. But it really does put a really dark stain on the NBA's sort of, hey, look at us, like we're back to normal, all our arenas are filled. But then, someone spits on Trae Young, someone throws a water bottle at Kyrie Irving. It really stains the whole business.
I had wanted to ask both of you about some really thoughtful comments that Jaylen Brown made about a lot of these issues. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I'm going to tweet out those comments just so that people can see them. If anyone's watching who hasn't seen them, they should. Gary Washburn and Esteban Bustillos, thank you both for making time to talk about this stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.